Welcome, everyone. Just waiting for some people to trickle in for just another moment, and we'll get started. All right. Looks like we've got a good audience going. Welcome to this evening's virtual event with Rabih Alameddine and Lucy Corin. My name is Holly Vorsanger, and I'm the events assistant here at Bookshop Santa Cruz, where I'm broadcasting live. And here at Bookshop Santa Cruz, we want to recognize the complicated and ever-changing context that we are all tuning in from, both in our local and global communities. The last 2 years have been tumultuous, to say the least, and we have tried our best to uphold our values as an independent bookstore, as well as to show up for our customers, our employees, and the general Santa Cruz community. We see these talks as a way to deepen and refresh in order to return to the vital work that is before us. And we hope that you find both refuge and inspiration here. We truly would not be able to put on these events without your loyal support, and for that we thank you so much. Tonight we are thrilled to celebrate both the wrong end of the telescope and the SWANK Hotel. This event is co-sponsored by the Humanities Institute at UCSC, and we thank them for their support. We'll drop a link in the chat so you can see more about their wonderful programming. Rabih and Claire will each read from their books and then have a conversation. And after that, we'll have time for audience questions. But before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping items. This event is being recorded so that you can rewatch it if you miss anything. That link will be sent to you within 24 hours of the event. We also encourage you to share your thoughts and enthusiasm in the chat below. By joining this event, you are agreeing to refrain from engaging in inappropriate behavior and harassment of any kind throughout the course of the event. And if you are using that chat, make sure that when you click the to button, you're doing it to everyone if you would like to share your thoughts with everyone. We also have an audience Q&A where you can enter your questions in that Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can pose questions as the talk is underway, and we'll get to those at the end. Also, if you haven't already, we encourage you to buy both of the books. I think that we just popped a link for that in the chat. Your purchase supports local jobs and independent culture and shows the publisher that our audience is invested and engaged. So thank you for your purchase. We also have some great events coming up with Ann Patchett tomorrow at 6 p.m., as well as Jaime Cortez on December 9th at 6 p.m. You can find both of those on our website in the events tab at bookshopsantacruz.com. And now on to the main attraction. Rabih Alameddine is the author of the novels The Angel of History, An Unnecessary Woman, The Hakawati, I, the Divine, Kool-Aids, and the story collection The Perv. In 2019, he won the Dos Passos Prize, and his latest book, The Wrong End of the Telescope, was chosen by Bookshop Santa Cruz to be featured in our popular winter reading program this year. And Lucy Corin is the author of The SWANK Hotel, 100 Apocalypses and Other Apocalypses, and 2 other books of fiction. She is the recipient of an American Academy of Arts and Letters Rome Prize and an NEA Literature Fellowship, and she currently lives in Berkeley, California. So please join me in welcoming both Rabih and Lucy to the screen. Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I'll let you two take it from here, and I'll see you back for the Q&A.
Okie dokie. Well, should we do a hi, Lucy? Hi, Lucy. This is a public hi.
Hi, hi, public hi to you. It's really good to see you from across the country.
I know.
I know, it's bizarre. It's wrong.
It's weird, but you know, I'm used to it. Except that, you know, for everybody, if you see me nod off, don't worry. I am old and I am on the East Coast, so it's way past my bedtime. And so let me read a little bit from the novel, and I'm going to set my timer so that I don't go over. Okay, here we go. This section is called The Little Rascals Go to Camp. Primarily, the narrator is in the car. They had just gone to watch refugees land on Lesbos, and they were taken to the camps. Yeah, this is all you need to know. Sumaya and her family rode the bus while Emma, Rodrigo and I followed in the car. Luckily, we decided not to take my Opel that morning. Emma's rental Honda was much more comfortable. In the back seat, I suddenly felt exhausted and sluggish. Drowsiness overwhelmed me. Talking to me through the rearview mirror, Emma suggested that I close my eyes for a bit. It would be at least half an hour before we reached Moria. I fell asleep before she finished her sentence. I dreamt of my father, of my mother, of sitting before them as an adult, all of us underwater in the Mediterranean, something like that, something fleeting and hollow. I heard strange knocking noises as if I were in an aquarium with some child knocking on the glass, my head echoing back. And indeed, it was a child who woke me. Or rather 5 of them, 4 boys and a little girl, all in clothes that had been seen better days if they'd ever have a good one. The kids stepped back from the car as soon as I turned, all of them giggling. I'd slept for hours, my head leaning against the rear window. I had a text from Emma explaining that she thought it would be best to let me sleep, that I should come to the camp when I woke up and call her. I stretched out my arms, used the car's roof as support, which made the children laugh louder. I got out of the car, asking them in Arabic if there was something wrong or if they found me generally amusing. The eldest boy, no more than 11, clad in a multi-down sweater, explained that I was snoring loudly. He could hear my snoring through the car window, he said, but not his friend and lieutenant, pointing to a younger boy, because his ears were filthy. His ears had so much dirt, the eldest boy said, that you could grow wheat in them and make bread. The other boy, whose ears did not seem any dirtier than the rest, was not amused. The children asked me where I was from, then introduced themselves. The leader, his lieutenant, and another boy were from the Aleppo area. The 4th boy was all the way from Pakistan and didn't speak Arabic. But he was fun nonetheless. And the blonde girl clad in strident colors was from Iraq and didn't say much because she was shy. But she had to be in the club because the leader's mother would beat him up if he didn't allow girls. And what did their club do? Well, it was only formed that morning, so their objectives were not entirely clear yet, but the main reason for the club's existence was mischief making, as in his mother told him to take his friends and make trouble for other people, not her, if he knew what was best for him, and of course he knew. Could they take me into the camp to meet my friend? Of course they could. And not only that, they could explain things to me since obviously I was new, but it was going to cost me. No, not money, but a whole chocolate bar, or 2, since there were 5 of them. And of course they knew I didn't have chocolate on me. I didn't even have a purse, but I could buy candy at one of the cantinas over there, the boys said. The big one facing the gate had the best chocolate. The owners had given them 2 bars that morning for picking up all the paper cups and putting them in a garbage bag. Had I ever had coffee out of a paper cup? And it was hours ago since they had their chocolate, and there were 5, and it was only 2 bars, and they could tell me all kinds of things about Moria. The camp to my right, not the city in the Lord of the Rings, but they could explain the movie to me if I wanted to, so I should buy them chocolate bars. Of course I should. Cars and vans were parked bumper to bumper on both sides of the narrow road. The Iraqi girl took my hand in hers. I thought she was following the universal edict of hand-holding when crossing the street. But then one of the boys grabbed my other hand. They were escorting me across, guides safarying me through the frightening savannah, making sure I wouldn't be attacked by a feral car. We passed a couple of wobbly snack trucks parked along the road. The boys called them cantinas. Apparently there were gypsies the day before, selling new and used clothing out of the back of a truck, but nothing nice. We had to maneuver around the numerous cantina patrons, primarily Syrians as far as I could tell, but at least 2 African men and 1 South Asian. Almost all smoking and drinking coffee. Quite a number of them were charging their cell phones. The cantina sold Sold everything anyone in the world could ever want, the boys explained. Did I need a phone, a SIM card, coffee, sugar, a sandwich, a foul-tasting banana ice cream, a much too expensive soccer ball, a messy t-shirt, anything my heart desires, and chocolate bars, I said. I bought them 5. I had to. The Greek owner, a woman in her 40s, suggested that I shouldn't have because they had too much sugar. She'd given them each a bar that morning, free of charge, after which they began to persuade her customers to buy them more. She'd lost count of how many bars they'd devoured. The little tricksters preened. I expected to find canary feathers stuck to their chocolate smears around their lips. When I asked the Iraqi girl how many chocolate bars she'd put up 4 fingers. Immediately within the gate to the refugee camp across the road was a large police van, its motor idling, its color a blue so gloomy as to be almost black. I couldn't look at anything else for a minute. It was a beacon of dark in the light, a big blob of bad color. The kids, still savoring the chocolate, stood on either side of me looking at the same van. They were so big, one of the boys said, pointing at 3 policemen in fall riot gear, smoking beside the van, helmet off to make it easier for cigarettes to couple with lips. They had not laid their polycarbonate riot shields down. Big boys with machine guns, batons, vests, neck protectors, knee pads. Yes, body armor made your ass look fat. They didn't speak English, another boy said, or Arabic. They didn't talk except to each other. The cinder block wall next to the gate shouted defiantly, "No borders, no nations," in red graffiti. Let me stop there.
Okay.
Again, I always stop at, just a little under what I'm supposed to read.
Yeah, I too am a great follower of instructions. And so, but I'm also like, the hardest thing in the world for me is to just sort of talk because, I'm a writer and I like to write things down. But my instructions said that I should take this time and I should talk about the book and then read from the book. And so of course I wrote what I would say about the book and then a little bit from the book. I did. I promise we'll have a real conversation later, but this is all I can do. I guess the first thing I just want to say though is like to say thanks to Holly for talking about these kinds of events as both a refuge and an inspiration. I thought that was really beautiful. And I just also really want to encourage people, like, even if you're not buying my book tonight, buy a book that's on your list from this bookstore, because they do so much for writers and for writing and for making places of refuge and inspiration.
And to add to that, the guy who's coming on the 9th, I think, Jaime Cortez, is actually a wonderful writer and his book is really funny. So buy that.
Okay, so this is where I wanted to start with my stuff. I knew I wanted to read something that would intersect with what Rabih is reading, and I knew he was going to read about kids giving a lay of the land of his book. Normally, I would read a section like that, something like from the opening of my novel. That would be reasonable. But what this part of Rabih's book really makes me want to do is to read the one single section in my novel where there is a child. My protagonist, M, her name is M. She thinks about childhood a lot, but there is just this one moment where there's an actual child character. At this point in the story, M has really gone through a lot and she is in a pretty depleted state. The book is anchored in her relationship with her sister, whose name is Adeline. Adeline struggles with a major mental illness. She's rarely on stage in the book, but she's always present. It's a book where one person's problems blur into another person's problems, where the difference between being ill and not ill is blurred, where what is medical and what is magical is blurred, where something that happens out in the world and something that happens in a person's interior is also blurred. There are sections of this book where I, Lucy Corin, the writer, blurs with the character M, and where my real life sister, Emily Hockman, blurs with the character Adeline. So Rabih, you can already see that this is one of the connections that I felt with your book. So my real life sister actually wrote an essay about reading this book, and that essay is incorporated into the body of the novel. She's also did the painting that's on the cover. This, well, now it's backwards, but you can see the text is backwards, but you can still sort of get a little sense of the painting. Okay, so she also did the painting for the cover. Okay, so in contrast to all of that blurring, there's an obsession with structure in my book. My obsession with structure of the book is pretty apparent, but also literally in the content of the book, there's an obsession with structures and physical spaces, buildings, vehicles, bodies, and that the characters inhabit and move through. Not incidentally, it takes place around 2008, and a lot of the plot is about the housing crisis. So I'm pretty sure that in this passage about this child, you'll feel some of those things that are about the way that the book operates overall. And even though it's nowhere near the beginning of the novel, I think it can still kind of introduce you to the novel. But what I really wanted this passage to do was to kind of do a little dance just tonight with Rabih's book. So here we go. M has just snuck out of the house that she grew up in. She's snuck out of it. M climbed down the house with relative ease and walked back to the road, walking along it in the night, not knowing how long or how late because she had no timepiece. An old guy let her ride in the back of his pickup with a bale of old straw. She didn't want to get in front with him. He said, "Suit yourself." She didn't have any pressing associations with the straw or the truck or the way the night was being. The slider window was open so she could hear his radio songs and she could see him drinking a beer. It wasn't even in a bag, and that all seemed fine. When she banged the roof with her fist, he let her out at a motel with a sign with a pierced heart. She and Ad, her sister, had some made up stories about the place. They'd driven by it all the time growing up. I bet this goes on in there. I bet that goes on in there. And then at some point, they'd lost interest in the sign, faded into the landscape for them. It was not nice in there. Nothing to admire for the kitsch. The beds were lumpy with springs. The bedding was pilled and damp. The carpet was sticky. The room smelled of ammonia. The windows were bolted shut. Even the actually painted landscape in its plastic frame had no desire for beauty in it. The glowing heart with the arrow was definitely pretty, but it was not attached to the motel because anyone appreciated it. It was attached because no one gave a crap, and the sign just kept lighting up every night all the same. All she had left on her was her license and her stack of bills folded in half. In the morning, she used one of the bills for the room and then had some coins in her pocket as well. She completed the walk to town and bumped into a guy she went to high school with, someone she'd done something sexual with way back that she couldn't remember exactly what or why. He'd been a respected athlete near the top of the high school heap. Now, big surprise, he was going through a divorce. He said, "You remember Rhonda," and Em said she did, but she didn't. He said, they had a beer at 2:30 in the afternoon, and then she went along with him to pick up his kid from his mother's. It was a Saturday. This guy and his life were everything she had not wanted when she left town. The boy was 7, and she ended up sleeping in his childhood. The boy was 7, and she ended up sleeping in his child-sized bed with him across his own room from her on a cot with a Disney blanket. "I'd let you sleep with me," the guy said as he was setting up the cot. "I mean, in the room, sorry. I mean, she wouldn't care at this point, but I don't want him to get any ideas. He's really sensitive right now." The kid's eyes shone in street light that came through the plastic blinds as he watched her try to fall asleep. He held a dump truck in his hand by his pillow, and she had no idea if that was age appropriate. She just kept thinking, poor kid, the crap he's inheriting. Who would fall asleep first? One of them did. The next day, she convinced the guy to let her sleep on the cot in the garage instead, which she did for a while as she worked through her options and their logistics. It was an immaculate empty garage, the kind where the house is attached to it rather than the reverse, and he'd moved his car to the driveway, some kind of restored sports car. It was yellow. During the day, she made use of the public library. Even here, in the small yet gentrifying town outside a city just large enough for an international airport and to host a riot, the library had become where people go to get off the streets to rest. They fell asleep in plastic chairs with their faces in books for privacy. Expert consultants felt that libraries had a problem with books taking up too much space. They advised transitioning to digital, doing more with Google, and adding a cyber cafe to boost business. Street people, was the subtext, would go back to the street if faced with people in the library purchasing muffins and drinks. But who was she to say anything? She was there for the internet because she did not want to bother the guy from high school who was already letting her sleep in the garage and hadn't asked anything more of her, not even to check on his kid, who came home from school by himself in the afternoon and let himself in the front door. That's my passage about a child.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
So we follow instructions, don't we?
Yeah.
So now we're done with reading. We're supposed to have a conversation.
Well, I mean, I thought the easy place to start would be to just ask you about those children in this reading, like why you have these children sort of introducing readers to this space that's new for Mina, your protagonist, and you know, the children through the book are threaded through the book too. And so I just wondered about your relationship with those characters, that little bench of rascals.
Well, the quickest way to answer is there were so many children. I mean, you know, when first thing you notice when you go to any of the camps is how many kids there are. It's just nonstop running all over the place. When I first started working with, or at least talking to refugees, one of the first sort of essays that I wrote, because I couldn't really write much about it, but one of the first was, I think it was for the World Cup blog, which I was part of for the New Republic. And it was just asking these kids who they support for the World Cup. And just talking to them was a riot. I mean, you know, like some of them haven't seen anything, but they have heard that Messi is the best player in the world. So yes, it was primarily because it's sort of like you walk into Moria and the first thing you see is kids and kids running all over the place. And they're actually sort of, what I thought was great is, like every place you start getting, you know, like the Syrians would be in one place, the Afghans would be in another place, the Iraqis would be in another place, the East Africans would be in another place, and the kids were all over the place. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, it didn't really matter. So yes, it had to be them that bring her into the camp. And yes, there's a lot of reasons for it, but primarily I think it had to do with their fun, and they're able to transcend the divisions. You know, it's like they're able to talk to the volunteers, they're able to make fun of the volunteers and to make fun of, you know, their parents and everybody else. So that's that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that it made me think of, we were having a conversation about something very different, but I remember you describing watching kids play soccer. And I think you described it as just one of the purest joys.
Absolutely.
That, you know, it's just watching them play.
Especially there's a certain age where, you know, they start knowing how to play. And that's always fun. But before that is even more fun, where they all move with the ball like an amoeba. You know, it's like defense, offense, it doesn't matter. They all move together and it's just gorgeous to watch. It's just so beautiful. Both boys and girls. It's this instinct of, you know, here's the ball. All, you know, like usually it's supposed to be 11 and against 11, but with kids it's sometimes, you know, like 7 against 7. So if it's 7 against, all 14 are going with the ball. You know, 14 coming. I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, my turn.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You got it.
Yes, my turn,
Okay.
my turn. Again, the whole idea of doppelgangers, you and the narrator, your sister and the sister in the book. How do you do this? How do you keep? When does the mirrors stop becoming a mirror in some ways? I'm not trying to be
Yeah.
tricky. I'm just saying a lot of it is I don't know. I mean, with my work, because it's mine, I kind of know when when it's fiction and when it's not fiction.
Right,
But
right.
when I am there, and I was in this book, a lot of things changed. That it wasn't, some of it is fiction and some of it is sort of memoirish, which that's what I was interested in. And, those are the writers that I usually am interested in, who can transcend fiction, nonfiction, memoir, travelogue, whatever. It's like, is this a novel or is this everything? And I felt that with yours.
Yeah, I mean, the journey with this book has just been so long. But the beginning was that the impetus to write the novel was that something really dramatic happened in my own life. And I was a fiction writer. I didn't want to write a memoir. I'm not, and I don't want to be one of those writers that floats. But of course, I care about other genres and other modes of writing. And I'm informed by all of the things I read, which includes memoir, includes poetry, right? So it's all like part of what I love about fiction is that it can pull these things into it. And still be fiction, just be fiction that is elastic in a really exciting way for me. So I started with something that with the urge to write about something super dramatic that happened in my life. And I was like, when you're a writer and something really dramatic happens, you want to write about it. And then it was a long part of the process of writing the book to make that distinction, to let the things that had happened in the world to me separate from the world, to just move into what I think of it as an entirely fictive space, this thing that doesn't exist except for words on the page. And then there was this other layer of it where that double narrator didn't come into the writing of the book until very late in the process, when I was sort of trying to reconcile the history of writing the book with the idea of the book going into the world and the attachments that I knew it had to people, and trying to ask myself about that in a really serious way. But first, it was the mirror was I had to wrench the book out of my lived experience, and so that I could see the characters be their own things as characters instead of as fragments of people. And then there was this other layer where I had to sort of figure out how to entwine them, because it was so much part of the story of the book for me was that it was attached to people in the world.
Yes, but again, it's fascinating because it's like we planned to write similar books at the same time, or at least similar issues at the same time. And I don't know exactly what your process was, but I'm fascinated by could it have been the same? Because again, I assume that when something dramatic happens, all writers go I must write about this, but like you, I am not a memoirist. I always joke that I hide in fiction, but then I don't hide that much. So it's a double thing. But yes, I mean, with me, what I thought was interesting I wanted to write about what happened to me on Lesbos, and leading up to that, and I wasn't able to, and I couldn't, and it was everything I wrote was shitty and just horrible, and it took me a long time to understand that I wasn't able to pull myself away enough to be able to see it clearly. Yeah. So the weird part was that, I think I've mentioned it now in every interview, I was writing another story with this character, a trans woman, Mina, and, And she migrated from this story that I was writing, which had nothing to do with the book, into the book. So all of a sudden, when she started telling the story and I was still in the book, it was just the right distance to be able to, to see what was happening without my involvement, without my neurosis, shall we say.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by this. And of course, I know that I'm not the only one who's done it. But it's fascinating that you're doing it and I did it, and we're friends. Like, it's like, how coincidental is that?
I mean, well, the other thing that I think is strange, and maybe I should, I'm going to ask you it now because it's personal, but it's not too personal. But we met at a dinner party. We were seated next to each other, and I think what we talked about that first time that we'd met was that we were both freaking out about trying to write these impossible books. And I think we both were like, I think we had a sense that they were going to be coming out at the same time. And I think we had a sense that, and we just talked about both not knowing what to do with our books, but we didn't talk about this.
No. Yeah, but also, again, there were, unfortunately, because I'm teaching and stuff, I wasn't able to read the whole book yet.
Yeah.
But I did read quite a bit, and I skimmed it and stuff, and I was fascinated. Your play with structure is not something that I did in this book, but it's something that has interested me throughout my books. I mean, I play with structure all the time, so that I'm going like, oh, we have similar interests. Amazing. Like how it's like duh, we hit it off. We're friends. Of course we'd have similar interests. But then when Loki came in, that was it. That was like, no.
Yeah, how could it be? I know.
How could it be? So tell me about Loki.
So, all right. So there's a few sections in the book where there's like tales that come in. Like there's a story of a saint that I retell in the context of what's going on in the characters. And then there's this story of, I call it's Loki. It's a story, the myth of Loki, the jokester, which I retell in the context of this book. But the reason that I got to Loki was that I had this character who, in a state of madness, had sewn his mouth shut. And I wrote that just because I just had him do it because it was horrible, and because I was so afraid of trying to depict people who are in these extreme mental states. And I'm so angry at the way they're depicted so often that I was inventing throughout the book different ways to like make it impossible for them to speak in the book in order to like put pressure on that. Like I wanted to put pressure on that phenomenon. And I also didn't want to commit the crimes that I accused other pieces of art of. So I had this man have his mouth sewn shut. And then I asked myself, which I'm always doing, like, why would I do that? And so I started, looking back at, where that image comes from for me. And of course it comes from David Warnowitz, and it comes from, and then I started looking back at the history of that image, trying to actually understand that iconic work of art a little bit better. And eventually I got to this image of this stone that was like this ancient Nordic stone, or like somewhere in Viking land, with like the image of this god with his mouth sewn shut. And then I read the myth, and then I rewrote, and the myth seemed to me to be about storytelling. And it was one of those magical synchronicities where I was like, this myth is embedded in the image that I picked because it's embedded in the culture I move through that makes me think of images. And now I'm going to write it so that it shows me what's going on with these people in my book. So that's how Loki ended up in it. We turn to these stories that we carry, and sometimes we carry them consciously, and sometimes they're just in our bodies.
Yeah. Like I said, and it was funny because to me, but this was not this book, this was the last book. It's like when I feel frustrated and I don't know what to do, and then all of a sudden Satan came and rescued me. It's like, yeah, Loki.
Right.
Yeah. And my Satan was a trickster. Yeah.
you know, those kids are tricksters too. You call them tricksters in that passage.
But again, it's and you know what the kids do later on in a couple of things is definitely low-key. I mean, it's not the, you know, sending the young volunteer to look for her phone in the restroom was
Right.
was bad.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think you do some really fascinating things in terms of structure in this book. I mean, it's written in these non-chronological passages. They go all kinds of unexpected places, and it can take a while to understand like where the link is, because you're building and building and building the resonances across different kinds of difference and in-betweenness and culpability and things like that through. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that, like, even though you move through time in a really free kind of way in this book, there's the one story of, do you say her name's Sumaya? So like the other thing is that there's just such an abundance of stories about refugees. And, you know, in the story of the writer figure in the book, he carries all of these stories of these refugees and doesn't know what to do with them. And so I feel in the book the abundance of possible stories that could be told, and also you tell a whole bunch of them. And all of this is just to say, like, one of the things that works in like anchors the book is that in the present story of being in this camp with Mina, so the story of Sumaya and her family is the one that you follow. And I wonder what it was like to land on that story. You know, you have all of these choices, right? And you land on her story. And I'm interested in what it was about her story and what it felt like to sort of choose one.
Actually, it's really interesting because, you know, I interviewed, you know, again, the number keeps shifting because I never really counted, but somewhere around 500 people through the years. And a lot of those stories are in the book, but the Sumaya is probably the one completely invented story. So I've always, when I was writing it, I found that interesting that of all the amazing stories that I heard, when it came down to the book and the structure and the way that the plot had to go, it had to be an invented story. You know, I was, again, was fascinated by that. Primarily, I think because you have to pick stories, I call them tuning forks, where you might think that you're on a digression or on a tangent or something. And you do this, by the way, in your book, but that you're just hitting a tuning fork here, and the other tuning fork will start vibrating over there.
Absolutely.
Sumaya's story, and even her husband and kids, and the little daughter Asma as well, contains practically all the other stories. That they start, you know, you hear this when, you know, Asma asked about, oh, you know, are you a man? It brings up all these different stories. All these stories then begin to come together based on that, you know, one thread. But the other thing that's important is, again, you know, that is the whole idea of the framing. I usually like one story to go through the book so that the others are sort of like a leitmotif around it that we keep, you know, again, we're coming up with metaphors. First tuning forks, now I'm thinking heater. You know, it's like there's this filament that comes in, and around it are all these things that bring heat together. So yes, these are just, you know, how shall I put it? Techniques, but they come naturally to the story. Yes, it's funny because I, you know, played around with different characters, and was a brother came in, and then, this other nurse came in, but Sumaya came out fully formed. It's like she came out, I saw her and obviously, again, she's a sort of mirror image to Mina, the sort of the pulling together, and and she's both unique and a representative of what was happening, like the sacrifices that they were all these refugees have to make. Yeah. Sorry. That we know some people in the audience. Let's just say when your editor starts writing in chat, we should start to worry.
What is going on? I'm sort of, I should look over. Yeah. Are we on track for taking questions, or
yes, apparently there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Holly,
hi.
Come save us.
No, you guys are doing great. I'm really enjoying this chat. But yeah, we do have a lot of questions, so let's dive in. All right, we've got one here. This says, for both of you, thank you for this wonderful discussion. As both of you have written story collections as well as novels, I would love to hear more about the differences there in your process and what excites you or how you decide the scope of a project.
Lucy.
Yeah, I love the short story. And most of I try to bring the values of the short story to the novel. The values that are like, you have to do something with everything you put down. Like everything you put down, you have to do something with, is sort of a short story rule. I was talking to a student today, and I was like, that thing they say where like, if you put a gun in, the gun has to go off. I'm like, it's not just the gun, it's everything. Everything you put in has to go off in a short story. And the novel, like, even though it allows and it craves looseness, and looseness also has a form to it. I still like to demand certain things that I cherish in the short story form when I'm working on a novel. And that means that like the amount of things that I'm holding in my head in certain points of writing a novel is just ecstatic to me. Like, I just cannot believe how much is in my head at the same time. I've never done, I mean, it's really, when it feels like a short story on crack is when like, I really love it the most, even though like, you have to, if it's a novel, you just have to be willing to live in it for a really long time. You can't, and you just, and how do you know the difference? Like, if you can finish it quickly, it should be a story. If you can't, because like there keep being more things that you have to do, that you've set up, that you have to do something with, then it's a longer project. That's my thoughts on it for now. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I write short stories. I don't know how good they are. I like novels, and it's funny, lately, I think most of my novels have started out as short stories. And then, you start adding a little bit, and then realize it's actually a novel. I don't know, it's like when I first sit down to write, I sit down to write. Usually, like I said, I hope it's a short story because, those finish early, relatively short. Usually, if it's interesting, and again, here's the trouble is if I like it, then it stays with me. And then, all of a sudden I start thinking about it, and it expands. Like I said, this one was, I've written essays. it has, some things from essays. It had a lot of it from a short story that I wrote that I never published with Mina, the character. It was just a completely different story. But I took a lot of that into this story, into this novel. So lately it has been that, I write a short story, and from that I begin to pull it apart and write a novel. And I don't know why.
That's fascinating. Thank you. All right, we've got a question. This says, this is probably not a beautiful question, but anyway, Rabih, how do you feel about your novel being translated and published in a country that's not a part of the copyright law? In this case, the country is Iran.
I can't speak for all countries that have copyright law, but I love that my book came out in Iran. It was both translated and The Angel of History was actually published as is in Iran without permission. Nobody knew about it. Had I not been visiting Iran, I would have not known about it.
Oh, wow.
It's like, yes, of course, I would love more money for, I need, it would be really helpful. But the truth of us is most of us would love to be read, and they can't afford a $20 book. They in Lebanon, I'm read, but really only by people who can afford it, and most people can't. They know of me, they might have, but they're unable to buy the book because it doesn't make any sense for publishers to put it below that. And in Lebanon, even if they reduce the price to $15, that is, sometimes a month's salary. And in Iran, it's the same way. So, but whether it's intentional or not, they can print the same book, The Angel of History. They printed the whole thing for $1. They're selling it in bookshops for $1. And people were buying it. And I kept thinking, they are buying this, gay book with sadomasochism and Satan and death, and it sold really well. Hey, I love it. It's they translated an unnecessary woman. I can't tell you, I can't read it, but I think it's great. It's like I understand. I mean, I am all for copyright law. It's how I make a living, but it's like it would be the same. I mean, I know it's not the same thing, but like that we hold patents for vaccines that could save the world, and we hold them from people who cannot afford it, is a crime. Now, my book is not going to save anybody, but hey, if anybody wants to read it, more power to them.
That's kind of a perfect transition into this next question.
Okay.
It's also for you, Rabih. Can you talk about the relationship between writing and activism, specifically between your work with refugees and your stories that draw from that work?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that my work, I love activists. Most of my friends are activists. I sit at home, I'm not an activist, it's like, I don't view my work with refugees was never about activism. It's about listening to stories. That's what I do. But I don't supply, I don't know if I distinguish anything, and probably Lucy will tell you the same. Everything I do informs my work, and I can't help it. If I see a refugee, I go talk to them.
Do you think of stories as activism at all, or the
Not really. I mean, yes, the whole idea of the novel, there's many themes in the novel, but one of the main ones is how ineffective, novels are. Mm-hmm. And how ineffective, working with refugees is. You still do it because it's like it's worse not to do it. It's like it's worse. But for most writers I know, I think we hate writing novels, but we hate not writing novels more than we hate writing novels. I think for me, it's like, I think activism or trying to help I don't know. I don't consider it activism. I consider it, something that I do. I do many things, I think, again, and the whole novel is about questioning one's motives. And I question my motives as if you want to say, as an activist. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely not a question that can be answered in.
Yes, not we have to bring, some philosophers in.
Yeah. Thank you, though. I've got a question for Lucy. I loved how you played with structure, specifically with the insertions of allegory, distractions, stories, etc. Can you talk about your inspiration for this? It reminds me a bit of Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House.
Well, I wanted to take seriously the ways that the mind moves that are often associated with madness. So I wanted to take, and trauma, and disordered thinking, things that were sort of maligned as not the things that make meaning, but the things that detract from meaning. And I wanted to take them seriously as ways to I wanted to count them as meaningful instead of as things that you shouldn't pay attention to, or that you should cast aside for order and directness and things like that. And in order to do that, I followed my nose tangentially, and I went down I did all these things that when you are taught how to write a novel, I don't know that people really think that they teach anybody to write a novel, but I think that this is all terrible advice if what you're looking for is advice for trying to accomplish the moving from the beginning of something to the end of something. So I just let myself go down every freaking rabbit hole that I encountered as I was writing. And then an enormous amount of the work of the novel was going, okay, now what? I have this pile of tangent. What's the real story? What's the story that those tangents are telling me? And how do I make the writerly decisions of what belongs and what doesn't belong if I don't prejudge that for a really long time? And so the leaps get bigger, and one of the things I love about that is that, I always think that the cool thing about metaphor is and the cool thing about a joke is when the setup and the punchline are as far away as possible, but then they totally make sense and they bring the world into they snap into place in a way that is unexpected, because who could predict how you would get there? And I think metaphor works that way too, making the connections between things in that you don't know how you're in that state of suspense until the connection is made. And so just raising the bar of that was really exciting for me as a writer and as a person lost in trying to figure things out that are impossible to figure out.
Thank you. All right. A question from Gerardo. Lucy and Rabih, given your discussion about how to pick a thread to follow and expand, I'm wondering, how did you know when your books were done? When did you know your plot had given you everything it could?
Did I ever know that the plot had, I can't remember the quote by Paul Valéry. He says something like a novel or a poem is done when you're dead, when you're exhausted. I usually a novel for me is done when I can't stand it anymore. Really, really can't stand it anymore. How long, I sit on it, stuff like that is personal. But when it gets to the point where I'm done, I can't take this anymore. When it's no longer, when it's given everything and it becomes annoying more than curious. And you know what? It has worked every time. Whenever I feel that I'm done, it's usually I'm done.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest problems as a writer is that I think I'm done every time I reach I have a revelation. Like all of you in the writing process, I'll have a revelation. I'll be like, woohoo, I'm done. And it happens. It happens. I don't know how to, it's really hard for me to get out of the book enough to see it clearly. And so this book was the hardest for me in that way. And so my short answer, which I think is the best answer, is that it was done when my editor said it was done. And it wouldn't be any editor. It would be like the editor that I really trust, that like really gets it. So, what a gift. Someone you believe to tell you it's done. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. I think we have time for maybe both of these or one more. Are there books or writers that you are champions of, either recent reads or that have been on your shelves forever?
There are many writers that have, but I like to champion books that are not popular. This is David's Story by one of the great writers, Zoe Wickham, which nobody reads, except unless you're South African. It is a brilliant book that so few people know of. That's the kind of books that I usually like to talk about. We all like Calvino, and we all, yeah.
So I feel similarly, but I get sort of attached to certain books for a while, and for a while the books, and I don't know, maybe they seem to me like they're very important books to a lot of people that I admire, but I don't know how widely loved they are. I don't think they're as widely loved as they should be, but the two that come to mind right now is Renee Gladman's book called Calamities, which I thought was amazing and sustaining to read before COVID, and then amazing and sustaining to read in COVID. It like forces you into a state of meditation, and it was really grounding for me. And then the other one is that I've been thinking of, that I can't, it's so boring for me to praise this book, but it's Horacio Castellanos Moya is a novelist who always blows me away. Every one of his books is just a rush and a gem at the same time. And my favorite one remains Dance with Snakes, but I don't know if it's because it's the first one I read, and so like it was so revelatory to me to read something like the world that he puts you in. So I don't know if that's actually, if it's just because that was the first for me, but they're all good. Like you just can't go wrong with that guy. So
thank you. I think we've got some links in the chat for both or all of those books. Let's see. Oh yeah, someone says, would it be possible to put the book ideas in the chat? Yes. And I think that we are out of time, but it's been such a lovely chat. Thank you so much for being here. Especially thank you, Rabih, for staying up past your bedtime.
My cats are waiting right there.
Okay, good. Well, then we'll let you go. And yeah, everybody buy the book if you haven't already. The recording will be sent to you within 24 hours. And thank you both so much. This has been lovely. Have a good night.
Good night, and thank you.
Thank you.